Okay, so today we are dividing rational expressions. Remember when we were doing dividing fractions back in the day when we had something like 2/3 divided by 4/6. Okay, what's the rule for dividing fractions? Let's go with Nathan.
Well, in this case, you would just simplify 4/6, but after that,
No.
No.
Shh.
Oh, really?
What do? Yeah.
You take the first term and you reciprocal and multiply.
No.
The second term.
We take the second term and we multiply by the reciprocal, which would be 6/4. Okay? So now I know 2 goes into 2 once and twice. 3 goes into 3 once and 3 times. Okay? And so we are left with 3/2. Yes. Oops. Wait a second. 3/2. And so it's 2/2, which equals 1. Okay? We're not cross-multiplying. Cross-cancel, because it's not an equation. All right. So we're basically doing the same thing with our rational expressions. We have to, step 1, we're going to reciprocate. Okay? Please write while I'm doing this. We have to reciprocate. And we multiply. First fraction stays the same, multiplied by the reciprocal of the second fraction. Now we factor. The numerator, what can we factor?
GCF.
A GCF of 2, and we're left with x minus 3. I have a 5 times. In the denominator, what can I factor to?
X plus 3, x minus 3.
And we end up now simplifying. So I can get rid of I can cross-cancel an x minus 3, which is cross-dividing, right? I can divide a 5, and I'm left with 1 and a 3. And so in the numerator, we are left with 6. And in the denominator, we are left with x plus 3. Okay, questions? All right, so let's try the next one. We're going to factor, and then we simplify. Only if it's asking you to state the domain. Don't state the domain and do things when I'm not asking for it. Okay? And so we reciprocate, we factor, we reduce. Now, there is some, if you want to factor first and then reciprocate, that's fine. Order doesn't matter there, as long as you do both of those. Okay, are there any questions? Okay, let's try the next one. Okay, pause the recording, and I want you to try this one on your own. Okay, so Kariana, what do I do first?
Reciprocate.
Which fraction?
X squared minus 25.
What am I going to do with reciprocate? What else? Not just reciprocate, but...
Multiply by the reciprocal.
Thank you. I'm going to multiply the first fraction by the reciprocal of the second fraction. So I'm not just reciprocating, I'm multiplying. Next step, Kariana.
So you're going to factor.
Oh. The numerator, what do I get?
4x squared.
No, 4x times.
Times. X. Oh no.
Yeah?
Yeah. 4x times x minus 5.
Good. Over 3x times, what am I factoring out here?
The 6.
Good.
6 times x plus 5.
Good. And then in the denominator,
It's a perfect square, so
difference of squares.
x
X.
plus 5 times x minus 5.
Good. Okay. Now, what can we cross cancel? So we've factored,
3.
and then we reduce, right? We are, what'd you say? I can take a 3 out, and I'm left with 1, and a 6 out, and I'm left with 2. What else?
Plus 5.
What?
The x plus 5.
An x plus 5 and an x plus 5.
X minus 5.
X minus 5. Anything else? Ethan?
The x.
It's not 1. That's supposed to be x. 3x.
It's 1x.
No, if you factor out the x.
Oh, what is
So
that?
it's just 4.
Yeah, it's just 8.
So it's 4. There's an x up top and there's an x on the bottom. We just cross canceled it. So now what? We're left with
2 equals 8.
what?
4 times 2 equals
8 is the answer. Okay, questions? Charlie.
Oh no.
Okay. Dariush.
Because you cancel out the numbers. I see that.
Okay. All right, let's go on to the next one. Ready? We have 8 of these to do today. Practicing them with me and if you're having a hard time, I want your hand to go up, okay? I'll come work with you. All right, might be a little bit more complicated. Remember, we have lead coefficient factoring here. Don't forget. Right? Multiply by 2. Okay? Anybody that doesn't remember, raise your hand and I'll come remind you. Pause the recording and factor that. When you factored, you should have come up with the following. Okay, Anthony, now what?
So in your first numerator, you have a 2x plus 1, and then on your second denominator, you also have a 2x plus 1, so those can cancel out.
So 2x plus 1 and 2x plus 1.
Yeah, and then you have the x plus 3 and the 3 plus x.
They're the same. They're both positive.
So those cancel out.
Okay.
And then you can do, I think you can do 5 and the 10.
I'm left with
So
1,
you
and
have
that would
1
be a
and
2.
a 2.
And so we're left with 2x over x minus 1. Are there any questions? Okay, let's move on to number. Okay, go. Number 3. Some GCF factoring, difference of squares. Pause the recording, do the next one. All right, Mike, step 1, what do I do?
Multiply by the reciprocal.
Which would be?
X squared plus 4x over x squared minus 9 times x plus 3 over x cubed minus 16.
Good. What would be the next step?
Factor
And the first numerator is going to factor to what?
x times x plus 4
X times x plus 4 over
x minus 3 and x plus 3
okay.
and then
All right, so x plus 3, x minus 3 times, keep going,
x plus 3
over
x times x minus 4
times,
minus 16.
no,
Oh no, and then x plus 4.
good. Okay, now what can I cross cancel, Melanie?
You could cross cancel x from the first numerator and the second denominator.
Good,
And then x plus 4 from the first and the second.
good,
And then x plus 3,
and x plus 3, and what am I left with?
1 over x minus 3.
Times what?
X minus 3.
Good, fantastic. And that's our answer. You good? Yeah. All right, let's try the next one.
What's the answer?
1 over x plus 3 times x minus 3. Notice, I do, quiet. I do want you to know, you guys, I'm recording. I do want you to remember, I prefer you to work up and down. Step 1, step 2, step 3. Don't add equal signs and work horizontally like my PowerPoint is. Okay? Okay, there's your answer. All right, you've got 2 more. Pause the recording and try the next 2. If you have something like this and it's not in fraction form, turn it into a fraction by putting it over 1. Okay? All right, so let's look over the first one. Remember, we have to reciprocate, multiply by the reciprocal on the second fraction. And we have to factor that denominator to 2 times x plus 6 times x minus 6. Now, what can we cross cancel? The x minus 6's. And then we are left with x plus 3 over 2 times x plus 6. Okay? Is anybody still working on number 5?
Yes.
Okay. I hear some are, so I'm going to give you another minute for that. Let's check number 5. Oy, we're late. Okay, so we're doing, I can factor the 4 out, and I'm left with y squared minus 5, and we can cross-cancel those, and we are left with 4 over y minus 5. Y minus 4. All right, I'm going to skip this one. Shh. Okay? Basically, if you want to pause the recording, I'll show you the answer. We're going to multiply by the reciprocal first. Then we're going to factor. We're doing x marks the spot for all 4 parts. And then we just cross-cancel. Okay? Now, this one I really like because remember, everything in there is to the 6th power. The binomial is to the 6th power, and the y is to the 6th power. You with me? Then I have to multiply by the reciprocal. Now, look what we can do. We can cross-cancel. When I take out 4 y plus 1s, and I take 4 out here, what am I left with? Y plus 1 squared. And then I can take out 2 y's here, and I'm left with 1, and here I'm left with y to the 4th. So our answer is y to the 4th over y plus 1 squared. I have one more slide. Questions? Okay, one more slide. We'll do it together. All right, so the next one, we go back to divide and state the domain. So step 1, we're going to multiply by the reciprocal. Okay? Step 2, what do we do? Not yet.
No restrictions.
Before. We're going to factor. Okay, I'm going to break out x squared minus 4 to x plus 2x minus 2. This is the point that I determine domain. Now, the thing that you have to think about is at one point this x to the 3rd was in the domain. So we must consider all of that fraction for domain. Because at one point in time, that x cubed was in the denominator. And now we have this in the denominator. Does that make sense? So my domain is x is such that x is an element of the reals, and x cannot equal what? 0, negative 2, and positive 2. Close. What? Right here. And when this was in the denominator here, if that's a 0. Okay? So we have 3 different restrictions. But now we can cross-cancel. A big part of your restrictions is that people, listen, freeze, cross-cancel, and then determine their domain. If you do that, you've crossed out, and you don't see it. Don't go with the ending for determining your domain. You understand that? Yes. All right, that's the video. What? Hold on a second.